Okay, so tell me, do you have any observations on how it's done in this article, and is there anything that maybe you can use when you're doing your analysis? Any thoughts? I heard something about it's pretty hard to see what was actually done or something like that. No?
So the researcher didn't know the participants before the interview?
Well, she, as it says, she knew them from observations.
Oh.
So they knew who she was.
Oh.
But they didn't have I mean, they didn't know each other, but I think that created a bit of rapport. Yeah. As it says right here, she had no prior involvement with the participants, but she was present and made observations, so they knew who she was. So that's a good start, I guess, for the interviews. And then we're moving on to the interview guide. And that was obviously influenced by the observations. And also, are you guys familiar with Bourdieu at all? No? Okay, that's, he's a pretty big gun, and we used his concepts of habits and social capital to see, to kind of, as a theoretical framework. And obviously, that's because we knew from the beginning that there was something with the social interaction in these team games that was very important. Okay, and then moving on to conducting interviews, pretty straightforward. Please note that we use the semi-structured interview guide right here, like you guys did or will do. So we have a bunch of questions we want to go through, but it's not like we have to take them in the correct order, and there's room for follow-up questions and stuff like that. Also, there's something with anonymity and stuff like that, held in locations that ensure privacy, and the interviews were fully transcribed and then coded in a software program. Since you guys won't have access to a software program, you guys will have to, I think the best way is actually to sit and cut out, print the interviews out, the transcription out, and then cut out the quotes that you're using, so you can kind of compile these are the quotes for, let's say, the basic psychological need for competence, and you can put them over there. So it'll be a very practical set for you guys. And then we move on to analysis. Did you get that far? Yeah? So before the interviews, we developed a list of themes, and that was based on Bourdieu, as I said. But also, when reading the material, there was a couple of new topics that arose there. So we read the interviews before we coded or analyzed them, and saw if there's anything new that we should include in our analysis. All right, and let's go down to results here. So as you can see, one headline was this: experiences with football, common background, inclusion, and enjoyment. And then we have common background here, inclusive here, and enjoyment down here. So those were kind of an overarching theme, and then some sub-themes. And as you can see, let's take the first one. we report something with, like, when they were asked about the experience, they compared the experience with previous attempts, blah blah, and then we kind of highlight that with a quote. So there's something with, I mean, this is a quote that's not, is from a guy we called Henry afterwards. I mean, his name wasn't Henry, it was a different name. And this is not a quote that's kind of taken out because it's interesting. It's taken out because it illustrates what all the participants said. So we kind of come to a conclusion on something with that they don't want they didn't want to do something that seemed to appeal to women, and then we kind of highlighted with this quote where it says, I wanted to do something with a little more power. So that's one way of doing it, and then we move on to the next kind of a little conclusion and highlight that with a quote as well. So you can see here that from the analysis, we've kind of made a hierarchy of themes and conclusions, and then just go through them one by one. And then you can see afterwards, going down, enjoyment, blah blah, those there, yeah. And then we have another headline that says, positive consequences of football. So I guess you could argue that the first part is guided more toward towards intrinsic motivation, and this is the positive consequences, so that would be extrinsic motivation, if we were using that theory to analyze it. Does that make sense? Okay, so I would like you guys to do something similar. Let's just see. When you guys come up with your codes, then it's important to know what is a good code. So, do you guys know the qualities of good codes by any chance? What would be a very good code? No one?
A code that answers your research question.
So it has to be tied to the research question. That's a very good idea, and maybe even tied to the theory. This is what it says in the book, and I like that. The valid part would be tied to the research question and the theory. Hang on. It should say mutually exclusive. That makes more sense. Like that. So if you can make codes that are mutually exclusive, that's great. It's not always possible. But it means that a quote can only be coded once. So if it is coded as, let's say, intrinsic motivation, it cannot be coded as extrinsic motivation as well. But having said that, maybe you have an informant that says, I really enjoy playing blah blah a lot, and it also gives me great friendships, for instance. Then the first part is intrinsic motivation, the second part is extrinsic motivation. So, I mean, that would be a quote that you put that you code twice. And also you can have, let's say, intrinsic motivation and basic psychological need for competence, and maybe your code will land in both of those codes. So try and see if you can make the distinction between your codes really clear, but it's not also always possible. And then they have to be, which is more important I think, exhaustive. You don't want a quote that you think is important for your research question, and then you don't have a good code for it. Then you don't know where to put it.
Can you tell me that?
Come again?
Can you take it one more time?
Yeah, the last part?
Yeah.
All the quotes that you think are important for the research question should be able to be coded with one of the codes you have available. So let's say, a very easy example would be that we have a code that's called basic psychological need for autonomy, and then one for competence, but you're missing the code for relatedness. Then it's not very exhaustive, because all the stuff that is connected to relatedness, you don't know which code to use. So, obviously you won't miss such an important concept of self-determination theory, but maybe the smaller facets are a little easier to miss a code for. Yeah? Okay. So, when you have your codes, then you'll read the interview, add more codes based on what you think, what you kind of find in your first reading of the interview. And then you'll have your code list. When you have your code list, then you can do your coding. And this is what is suggested in the book, but don't write that down. I have an easier option for you that might be a bit more, bit less difficult. But they say we want open coding, so reading and assigning codes to the different codes. Axial coding, so that's what they call it, so that's rereading and assigning new codes. Yeah, that's a good day, it's very thorough. And then we have the analysis of the codes, so which codes are connected to which code and which codes are kind of higher order themes of other codes. And then a selective coding where you read it again and kind of code the important as it says, selected quotes that you feel are important for the analysis in some way. That could be, as it says in the book, cases that illustrate the analysis or explain the concepts, or maybe looking for data that is contradictory or confirmatory, depending on the research question. I think this is a bit much for your little study, so I suggest this coding strategy instead. First, you develop codes based on theory. Then you read the interview for additional codes. Maybe there's something you missed, and maybe something that's still important for a research question but not very well answered in theory. Then you assign codes to the statements in the interview, and including that, when you develop your codes, you also develop a hierarchy of coding. So I'm just going to go with, let me know if you guys are tired of the self-determination example. But we have intrinsic motivation, and then we have the basic needs for autonomy, competence, and relatedness. And then we might have something with, let's say autonomy is both about feeling that they have influence on how the activity is organized. also that they feel that they can be themselves during the activity. It's also something about, I don't know what it could be, but these are the things that are not very well described in the theory, and that you kind of have to find these codes in interviews. But here you can see the hierarchy of what one would do if the analysis was done with self-determination theory. Yeah, questions or concerns? No? Okay. Hang on. There is in the book, it says, how should you analyze your data? And there are a lot of different approaches to that. And I just want you to know that, that you should use the clustering part of the analysis. So when you have Alright, you have a piece of paper with your transcriptions on, right? And the interviewer says this, and then the informant says, that's the informant, this is the interviewer 1. And then we have interviewer again, interviewee, and then number 2 says something, and interview. Okay, so that's how it goes. And then you can kind of code, this will be coded as with this code 1, and code 2, and maybe code 14 or something like that, depending on how many codes you have. And obviously you don't call them code 1 and 2, but competence or having fun or whatever it is. And some of the statements might be coded with a lot of codes, and some of them might be coded with one code, or even, I mean, if there's no code to the interview statement, it's probably not important for a research question. And then when you're doing the analysis, you cluster all the quotes in one code and say, okay, now we're going to analyze code 1. Let's cut out all the codes, or find them in the paper if you prefer that, that says something about code 1. And look at them together. Then you cluster them together, read them through, and then say, okay, what's the central theme here? What can we conclude based on these quotes? And then that's where you would arrive at something like the elderly men preferred a more manly activity than the activities that were available in the fitness center, for instance. And then you can, hopefully, within these quotes, find a good quote that kind of illustrates that point. Then you move on to code 2, do the same. Code 3, do the same. And then in the end, you'll probably have to choose the codes or the clusters that are most important for your research question, and leave some of the ones that are not that interesting out. But we'll see how much data you have on it. Yeah, does that make sense? I think we'll skip this part of it. But the next question, I'd like for you guys to do that. I want you guys to draw a cluster map of your analysis, I guess. So draw something like this. I mean, I already drew half of the intrinsic motivation if you're doing self-determination theory, but maybe there are other things that should be be in on this map as well. So if you guys can go into the pairs that you're working together with, and then sit down and draw a cluster map or mind map or whatever you choose to call it of all your codes and themes. I'll give you guys maybe 10 minutes for that. Yeah? Cool. Get going and let me know if you have any questions.